The Nordics are known for the dramatic fjords, archipelagos with thousands of islands, vast ancient forests, and even volcanoes and geysers. It is a bastion of peace and prosperity. But is that the whole story? Well, the short answer is no, definitely not. In fact, the now friendly nations of Sweden and Denmark have fought no less than 11 major wars. And the last one ended as recently as 1814. Today we may just throw jokes at each other. Back then, we threw cannonballs. This first episode will give you a grounding in Nordic history. We'll start in the modern times, seeing how the Nordics look today. Then we'll jump backwards in time to see how this region has evolved. The stops that we make will only be short glimpses, and the time periods we visit will be explored further in future episodes. I am your host Robin. Welcome to Historia Nordica. You may have come across the terms Nordic and Scandinavian before, often being used interchangeably to describe this part of the world. However, that is not quite accurate. Scandinavia consists of the kingdoms of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. The mountains that run like a backbone or a ship's keel through this peninsula are called the Scandinavian Mountains, or Scandies for short. These three kingdoms are each ruled by a single parliament, and the monarch's role is mostly symbolic. If we add the Republic of Finland to this mix, we now have Fennoscandia. As the name suggests, Finland is simply a republic with a single parliament and not a monarchy. Why that is will become more clear later in this episode. If we sail into the North Atlantic, we will eventually reach Iceland. And this completes our set of Nordic countries. The island sits rather precariously on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which is between Europe and North America. This makes the island volcanic. Like Finland, Iceland is a republic. More on why later. So we're done now, right? Well, not so fast, because there are still some areas we do need to cover. Nestled between Sweden and Finland, there are the Åland Islands. Although being a region of Finland, this archipelago is autonomous and demilitarized. Its only official language is also Swedish and not Finnish, just to make it even more special. In the very far north, where the Atlantic Ocean gives way to the Arctic Ocean, we have the archipelago of Svalbard. Svalbard, along with Jan Mayen, which is over here, are two remote jurisdictions of Norway. Svalbard has a population of about 2,500 residents, and Jan Mayen has 0, at least when it comes to permanent residents. Some military and research personnel do spend time on the island, with the population in the summertime swelling to about 35. We travel south to the Faroe Islands. This North Atlantic archipelago is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. It has its own parliament and controls many internal affairs, though Denmark handles defense and foreign policy. This arrangement is known as home rule, a form of autonomy that stops short of full independence. Faroese is the official language, and the islands have a strong cultural identity that is distinct from mainland Denmark. Last but definitely not least, we have Greenland, the world's largest island. Greenland isn't part of the Nordics geographically. It's in fact part of the North American Arctic. It is, however, culturally a part of the Nordics, being first settled by Icelanders and Norwegians in the late 900s. Today, the island is home to the Greenlandic Inuit as well as a Danish minority, and Greenlandic is the sole official language. Greenland is governed as an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, much like the Faroe Islands, and they have home rule. It also gets bonus points for being the only one of these territories or nations here to not have a flag that's simply a colorful cross. So, A for effort. Of course, we also need to cover Sápmi, which is the cultural region traditionally inhabited by the Sami people. It stretches across the far north of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and also Russia. They have cultural autonomy, but no legislative power over national law. They can't veto any government decisions, even those affecting Sami rights. For that, they must work through the national parliaments in Oslo, Stockholm, or Helsinki. As a cultural region, Sápmi has no sovereignty. There are, however, Sami parliaments, Samedigi, in Norway, Sweden, and Finland. They are involved to varying degrees in governing the region. These bodies work under the umbrella of the Sami Council, striving to preserve language, culture, and rights in a region where their voice has long been marginalized. Across the border in Russia, Sami representation looks different. Here, two organizations represent the local Sami through the Russian Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North, and they also participate in the Sami Council. We could go into much further detail about the history of Sápmi, the Sami, and their relationships with the Scandinavian states and Russia. Their story is one of resilience in the face of colonization, resource conflicts, and cultural suppression. We will touch on that story later in this episode, and in the future we will also dive deeper into it. So, from monarchies to republics, autonomous territories to cultural regions, the Nordic map is more complex than it might first appear. Now that we know the players and the board is set, let's get into our time machine and travel backwards to see how we got here. We start off with a relatively short jump backwards to the year 1900. Here we can already see some significant differences from the map of today. Finland is not yet independent, but a semi-autonomous region of Imperial Russia ruled by Nicholas II. This arrangement is known as the Grand Duchy of Finland. This includes the Åland Islands, which at this point are just another part of the Grand Duchy, though their story will take a unique turn in the years to come. Finland has its own laws and institutions, but a wave of Russification is underway. This is an effort to suppress Finnish identity and bring the region closer under Russian control. This growing tension, combined with the eventual collapse of Imperial Russia, will allow Finland to gain, or rather take, its independence in 1917. We sail westward over the Baltic Sea to land in the Kingdom of Sweden. At this time, it forms a personal union with Norway. This means that the kingdoms share the same Swedish monarch, King Oscar II at this point, but still has separate parliaments, laws, and institutions. So Norway has its own constitution and government, although foreign policy is controlled from Stockholm. This union won't last much longer though. Norwegian nationalism is growing and many Norwegians feel that the union is unequal. The desire for full independence is becoming hard to ignore and tensions are rising. Only 5 years from now, Norway will peacefully dissolve the union and become fully independent in 1905. Denmark is a constitutional monarchy under King Christian IX. It has a rigid grip of its overseas territories, but it is starting to loosen. What Denmark has already lost are the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein, ceded to Prussia in 1864 after a bitter conflict. Greenland and the Faroe Islands are both firmly under Danish control, governed as colonies rather than autonomous regions. This means that neither territory has home rule or any political autonomy. That will come later in this century. Greenland, vast and remote, is inhabited primarily by Greenlandic Inuit communities with limited European presence. Danish influence is growing, but the island remains largely isolated from mainland politics. The Faroe Islands, meanwhile, have a stronger cultural and linguistic connection to Denmark, but also has a distinct identity. Faroese is widely spoken, though Danish remains dominant in administration and education. Iceland is at this time also a Danish dependency, but unlike Greenland and the Faroe Islands, it enjoys a bit more freedom. It gained its own constitution in 1874 and will achieve home rule in just a few years, in 1904. Nationalist sentiments are rising, and Iceland will eventually take its full independence in 1944. Up in the Arctic Sea, the Norwegian flag has not yet been planted. Svalbard is considered terra nullius, meaning no nation claims sovereignty, though many have their eyes on it. Whalers, miners, and explorers from several countries operate here, drawn by its remote riches. A few decades from now, Norway will secure its claim through the Svalbard Treaty of 1920, planting its flag for good. A brief mention of the status of Sápmi and the Sami in 1900 before we move on. At this point, Sami communities across Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia are facing assimilation efforts. These policies will have a lasting impact on their culture and languages. There is no political representation or autonomy at all, only silence from the governments that surround them. We leap backwards another century to the year 1800. The Nordic map looks very different from today. Nations that we now take for granted, Finland, Norway, don't yet exist as independent states. Finland is not yet the Grand Duchy nor the nation that it will become, but falls under the Kingdom of Sweden, ruled by King Gustav IV Adolf. And this isn't as an autonomous region or even as a colony, but fully integrated into the kingdom, along with the Åland Islands. The region completely adheres to Swedish laws and institutions. In fact, in order to be part of this government, you may not need to be a Swede, but you do need to speak Swedish. This linguistic requirement reflects the kingdom's centralized nature. Everything will change dramatically after the Finnish War of 1808 to 1809, when Sweden loses its entire eastern half to Russia, creating the Grand Duchy of Finland. This war is not an isolated event, but part of a long and bitter rivalry between Sweden and Russia, fought across centuries for dominance in the Baltic region. Moving west, Norway is not independent either. Instead, it's part of a dual monarchy known as Denmark-Norway. This is quite different from the union that we saw in 1900. It is ruled from Copenhagen under an absolute monarchy. This means that the monarch holds complete and unrestricted power, with no constitution nor parliament to limit their authority. In Denmark-Norway, this power rests firmly with the Danish crown, which sits on the head of Christian VII. The kingdom also includes Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands. The duchies of Schleswig and Holstein, which we mentioned in the last segment, are still under Danish control at this time. The Industrial Revolution is yet to pick up steam. The economies of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden are still mainly agrarian and will remain so for most, if not all, of the 1800s. Sweden adds some mining and iron exports, but overall the Nordics are sparsely populated and overwhelmingly rural. Copenhagen and Stockholm are the only major urban centers. Major by Scandinavian standards, that is. They are still far from sprawling cityscapes. Copenhagen has about 82,000 inhabitants, while Stockholm has somewhere between 75,000 and 80,000. As a comparison, Berlin has 172,000 inhabitants, while London is a metropolis of about 1 million people. As we move further back in time, religion will become more important, so let's talk about where faith stands in the year 1800. Denmark, Norway, and Sweden are both strictly Lutheran, a Protestant denomination that emerged from the Reformation of the 1500s. The state and church are deeply intertwined. The separation of church and state that we know today is still many decades away. There is no religious freedom, not even for other Christian traditions like Catholicism. Membership in the Evangelical Lutheran Church is mandatory, and the church plays a central role in education, social life, and governance. The Sami are nominally Christian by this point, at least when the missionaries come to check. Centuries of missionary work have brought Lutheranism to Sapmi, but traditional Sami shamanism persists, quietly and in secret. Practices like drum rituals and spirit communications survive in hidden corners led by shamans known as Noide, a Sami word meaning the wise one or the knowledgeable one. The Sami hold true to these traditions despite harsh bans and persecution. We've now landed at the start of the year 1658. I've chosen this specific year because it marks a turning point in Nordic history. We are reaching the peak of the Swedish Empire, Stormaktstiden, the Great Power Era. Sweden has spent a century growing into a powerhouse in the Baltic region, controlling parts of modern-day Estonia, Latvia, and Germany. Right now, Denmark controls parts of the modern Swedish mainland, but this is about to change. The first Carl Gustaf War, named after the Swedish king Carl X Gustav, is still raging. This conflict is part of a long struggle between Denmark and Sweden for dominance in the Nordic region. In February of this year, it will end in a decisive Swedish victory. In a small town outside Copenhagen, King Carl forces Frederick III of Denmark-Norway into one of the harshest treaties in Nordic history, the Treaty of Roskilde. Scania, Blekinge, Halland, Bohuslän are now Swedish territory permanently. The one that hits Denmark the hardest will be the loss of Scania, Skåne. This is an historically Danish region, as we will see later on our journey. Along with these territories, Trøndelag and Bornholm are also ceded, but returned to Norway and Denmark respectively in 1660. Sweden has never been this large before and never will be again. 1658 marks the zenith of the Swedish Empire. At this moment, Sweden is not just a Nordic power, it's one of Europe's strongest. But this dominance won't last. In just a few decades, the Great Northern War will end Sweden's imperial ambitions for good. The empire will begin to crumble, gradually losing land until it reaches the borders we recognize today. Empire comes at a cost. The continuous mustering of fresh armies and the fact that most of the men who march off to war will never return keeps population growth stagnant, and prosperity suffers with it. With so few adult men left, some communities become almost matriarchal, and adult man at this time means anyone aged 15 or older. The soldiers of Sweden's armies aren't succumbing mainly to gunfire or artillery. What causes most of the casualties are diseases, dysentery, typhus, and other killers that thrive in the filthy army camps. Sanitation is a concept that won't arrive for centuries. Beyond the Roskilde Treaty, the Nordics in 1658 are far from static. The Faroe Islands are under harsh rule of the von Gabel family. Iceland, firmly under Danish control, is in the midst of its witch trials, where men, not women, were most often accused. Greenland is an icy frontier inhabited only by Inuits, though Denmark-Norway claims it on paper. And in the far north, the Sami live out their traditional lives even as Scandinavian crowns tax and encroach on their lands. We've now arrived in the year 1400 at the height of the medieval age. Europe is a world of feudal lords and vassals, where power is local and the Catholic Church shapes laws, culture, and daily life. Castles guard the countryside, cathedrals tower over towns, and most people live in small rural communities. Faith explains the cosmos, hierarchy defines society, and tradition governs life. The Catholic Church also holds power here in the north, as Martin Luther won't do his Reformation thing for another 100 years or so. The kingdoms of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway have recently united in the Kalmar Union, named after the Swedish city of Kalmar, where it was formed. With the kingdoms come Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands. This is a good union, at least on paper. Each kingdom still guards its own laws and councils, while foreign policy and the crown is shared. The power behind this crown is Queen Margaret I of Denmark. The crown itself, though, sits on the head of Eric the Pomeranian. Wait. Oh, it's Eric of Pomerania. This young union has the vast ambition of uniting the Nordics against the Hanseatic League and other foreign threats. The Hanseatic League, or Hansa for short, is a network of wealthy German merchants that control trade routes and ports, making it a formidable force in medieval Europe. For the Nordics, breaking free from Hansa dominance isn't just about pride, it's about survival and economic independence. The Kalmar Union is, however, a fragile one, with nobility in each kingdom wanting autonomy. Cracks are beginning to show, and the union will only remain for about another century. Beyond the royal courts, life goes on. The vast majority of the population are farmers, most often very poor farmers. They care nothing for the infighting of the nobility, just living their lives of hard toil working the land. If said nobility comes along making demands, such as higher taxes though, the farmers may fight back violently. This is something that especially Swedish farmers will become very good at in the 1500s, giving them a rather unique position of power. That, however, is a story for another day. A note here on the self-image of the people of this era. The nationalism that we mentioned earlier in the episode lies way in the future. At this time, the 1400s, Sven from Dalarna in Sweden would see himself as a Dalkarl rather than a Swede. Carsten in Scania would be Scanian and not Danish. This kind of local pride still lingers in the Nordics today, but nowadays feuds don't tend to end in bloodshed. In Finland, along the southern coast, Swedish-speaking settlers farmed the fertile lands, while deep inland the forests echo with Finnic traditions and shamanic beliefs. The Faroes cling to their windswept rocks, governed by the ancient Lögting, one of the oldest parliaments in the world. Iceland's bishops wield immense influence, and monasteries preserve sagas and scripture. Greenland's Norse colonies are in steep decline. A few settlers cling to life in the eastern settlement, but the Inuit now dominate the island's icy coasts. The Greenlandic climate has proven unforgiving to Scandinavian farming methods, as colder winters and shorter growing seasons choke their hopes of survival. Far to the north, the Sami live in small mobile communities, hunting wild reindeer and trading furs for goods from distant markets. A few tame reindeer pull sleds, but large-scale herding is still centuries away. Here, in the year 1100, the age of the Vikings has just ended and the Nordics have entered into the early medieval era. Christianity has taken hold, although Old Norse traditions still linger in rural areas. Old beliefs don't vanish overnight, and some of these traditions will even be incorporated into Scandinavian Christianity over time. Denmark, Norway, and Sweden are starting to emerge as kingdoms, but they are not as unified internally as they will become. They have been forged from so-called petty kingdoms that we will look further into in the next segment. Power is still fragmented among local chieftains and nobles, though these new kings are strengthening their authority. The kings rule in name, but the real authority often lies with the jarls. They are regional lords who command warriors and govern vast lands. As the name suggests, a jarl is similar to an English earl. At this point in time, slavery in the form of thralls is still present in the Nordics. It is, however, on the decline. The Hanseatic League does not yet exist to dominate trade as it will do in later centuries, but Baltic trade routes are growing in importance. As mentioned, Christianity has taken hold, and this hold isn't just spiritual, but also very physical. The first stone churches have started to appear in the past decades, and it will really ramp up in the coming century. In the 1100s alone, hundreds of stone and brick churches will be built across Scandinavia. The first archbishopric will be established in 1104 in Lund, officially entering Scandinavia and the Nordics into the realm of the Catholic Church. An archbishopric is a district or jurisdiction of an archbishop. It centralizes church power and helps organize the Christian church across the region. Later in this century, Nidaros, modern-day Trondheim, and Uppsala will also be made into archbishoprics in 1154 and 1164 respectively. The cathedrals that are the physical representation of these archbishoprics are still some of the largest and tallest structures in Scandinavia today. In the 1100s, they dominate the local landscape and can be seen for miles. Lund, Nidaros, and Uppsala give Denmark, Norway, and Sweden each their own center of church power. I'm sure that won't have any consequences at all in the future. To the east, what we now call Finland is a land of pagan tribes like Tavastians or Karelians, still beyond the reach of the Swedish kings. Beyond the mainland, the Faroes answer to Norway, Iceland governs itself under the Althing, and Greenland's Norse farms cling to life at the edge of the world. In the far north, the Sami trade furs while paying tribute to distant rulers. Here, in the year 800, we are at the dawn of the Viking Age. The Nordics are much smaller than today, and the unified kingdoms we've seen so far still lie in the distant future. Scandinavia is a patchwork of petty kingdoms and chiefdoms governed by jarls and chieftains. A petty kingdom is a small independent realm, often just a cluster of villages or a single valley, ruled by a local king, in air quotes, or a chieftain. These rulers control limited resources and rely on personal loyalty rather than centralized institutions. Alliances and rivalries between these kingdoms are common, and power can shift quickly through marriage, trade, or warfare. Warfare here isn't the mustering of large armies, but rather small-scale raids or skirmishes, groups of a few dozen men fighting each other. There is no Christianity here yet. Instead, pagan temples, magic groves, and sacrifices to gods like Thor and Odin dominate the culture. These rituals can even include human sacrifice. This is also an era where history and myth intersect. We have some external sources like Adam of Bremen or Ibn Fadlan describing their encounters with the Scandinavians, but much of what we know comes from the Icelandic sagas. These are texts written centuries later, blending oral tradition with legend. In these stories, historical kings like Harald Haerfare shared the stage with gods and mythical beings, often Odin himself. A king named Atli in the Völsunga saga is even believed to echo Attila the Hun. These sagas are invaluable, but they are not straightforward history. They're part memory, part myth, and part medieval storytelling. The sagas also feature other names that may sound familiar. In the Heimskringla, we meet King Gandalf of Alfheim. Yes, that Gandalf. Tolkien drew heavily on Scandinavian myth and folklore when creating his legendarium, and this influence will be the topic of a future episode. The Faroes are just being settled, Iceland lies empty, and Greenland is unknown to the Norse world. The Sami are present at this time, already having lived in the area for centuries. The Sami communities living on the Atlantic coast hunt whales and trade parts of them, like whalebone, to the Norse. They also exchange furs, hides, and antler for iron tools and grain. These interactions aren't just economic, there is cultural exchange too. Norse sagas even speak of Sami magic, seid, and their skill as hunters, showing how much the cultures noticed each other. This is where Nordic and Scandinavian history begins, around the year 800. Why? Because this is when we start seeing written sources describing the peoples of the region, like the famous account of the Viking raid on Lindisfarne in 793. In short, history means we have written sources, while prehistory is everything before that. And because writing appears at different times in different places, history begins at different times as well. And this is where we end our first episode, but our journey is only just beginning. In the next episode, we will start here because the world is about to feel the reach of the Norse. The Viking Age has only just begun.